Atheism and Satanism, a topic that should be simple enough to understand, but all too often gets mangled by people who don't understand what one or both of those words mean. Get ready, it's time for a Satansplain.
Well, it's not Satan worship, it's Satanism. It's embracing the life-enriching things which have traditionally been given the devil's name. Pride, lust, earthly success, rational self-interest, atheism, humor, nonconformity, science, a passion for living, being selective about whom we love. We don't see these as shameful sins, but empowering ideals. And we also recognize the psychological power and fun of symbolism and aesthetics, so we utilize Satan as mythology's most fitting mascot for what we're about.
Satansplain, Satanic Talk with Church of Satan Magister Bill M.
Welcome to Satansplain. I am your host, Magister Bill M. You know, there are some topics that come up again and again in Satanism. Sometimes not only by the non-Satanists, but by the Satanists themselves. And no matter how many times we try answering the topic, the questions keep coming up. Most often they keep coming up by people who, like most humans, are just intellectually lazy and don't want to read up on the answers we're giving out millions of times. Other times, though, you'll find people who think they understand, and then they try to explain it only to make the topic a little more confusing. One of these topics I'm talking about is, concerning atheism and Satanism. Now, if people really understood what those two terms meant, well, I could end this show in about 30 seconds. Atheism means not having any belief in the existence of deity. Satanism is a religion that doesn't believe in deities. Therefore, Satanists are atheists. They're done. Thank you for listening. Unfortunately, no, there are people who don't really understand what I just said or will raise objections to it. And like I said, some people give their own explanations, which I personally would have some disagreements with. Church of Satan Magister Nemo, for example, wrote an article on this very topic a while back. You can find it on the official Church of Satan website, churchofsatan.com, and the essay was called Simplifying Satanic Atheism, subtitled My View. Personally, though, I've always had some disagreements with what he wrote, or at least how he wrote it. Now, before I go any further, let me be clear, this episode isn't some kind of attack on Magister Nemo. I've known Magister Nemo for a number of years. We've met in person a few times. We get along fine. We have respect for each other's work. We do have some disagreements on some things, but even then, they're not disagreements with Satanism itself. We're both magisters in the Church of Satan. We're both Satanists. We are both in agreement with the fundamental principles of Satanism as summarized in the Satanic Bible. One of the reasons I mention all of this, and this is just a point I want to make before we get into today's topic, there seems to be this catch-22 that I've seen some idiots try to put on the Church of Satan. If somebody like, Magister Nemo and myself agree on something, and we say, yes, this thing is part of Satanism, but this other thing that this other guy is talking about, well, we would say that is not Satanism. So, like, when that happens, somebody whines, oh, you guys are a cult. You all think the same, and you're not allowed to disagree on anything. But then when we do have disagreements on something like, politics, or whether there is any truth to this story about an alleged haunted house, or whether this thing this celebrity in the news did was philosophically satanic or not. When you see two Satanists having disagreements with that, it's like somebody jeers just the opposite. Oh, there's a schism in the Church of Satan. Or, oh, then you should accept my version of Satanism too, because, Satanism can now mean everything you want, and I worship Pazuzu as a literal being, and I sacrifice animals. There's no winning with idiots like that either way. I realize that. And the reality is, we are not a cult, but at the same time, this isn't a religion where anything goes. So anyway, now that I've gotten that off my chest, for the rest of you who understood that point, those of you who have an IQ in the triple digits, I know you're out there. You're listening right now. Thank you. Let's continue. So Magister Nemo does say right in the essay that what he wrote was his view. So in this episode of Satansplain, I'm going to give you my view on atheism and Satanism, using my words. What I'm going to do is talk through an essay of my own that I've had in the works for a while. Some of this essay may materialize as a new section of the churchofsatan.com FAQ, namely a section for atheists and the frequently asked questions that they ask. Reverend Jared Mammon and I were working on such an FAQ a while back, so that may get put on the site. We'll see. In any case, let us begin. Here is my essay, the working title of which is On the Complication of Atheism, or Complicating Satanic Atheism. We'll see. Even if one has not picked up and read the Satanic Bible, a simple bit of research on the basics of the Church of Satan and Satanism quickly reveals that Satanism is a strictly non-theistic religion that views Satan only as a metaphor. As Satanists don't believe in any deities, this means Satanists are atheists. This should be simple enough to understand. Alas, the same tiresome questions and inaccurate statements keep on appearing on this topic. And I've categorized these questions and statements into 3 categories. Those categories are 1. Lunatic lines, 2. Loaded lines, and 3. Lost lines. This first group, lunatic lines, those are the lines that I hear from lunatics like the QAnon believers. And then second are the lines that are not from lunatics, but are from atheists and sometimes trolls. And finally, the third category are lines that I hear sometimes from Satanists. Maybe they understand Satanism, but they don't understand what is meant when we say Satanists are atheists. Or in some cases, are like pseudo-Satanists, these people who call themselves Satanists, but clearly do not follow the same religion that I do. So let's get to this first category, lunatic lines. So in extreme cases, I will hear claims like the following, namely from either hardcore Christians or conspiracy theorists, though those groups are often one and the same. So, for example, I will hear, "You're not really atheists because I know you secretly believe God exists. In fact, to deny God is to presume he exists." Or, "Atheists do not exist because everybody worships something, whether it's God or money or the government or something else." Or I'll hear a line like, "Well, yeah, the Church of Satan may say that they're atheist, but you see, that's just a front. Because when you reach the upper ranks of these satanic groups, you find that they secretly believe in Satan and they're Illuminati devil worshippers." Accusations like the ones I just rattled off are so intellectually bankrupt and have been debunked so many times that I'm almost reluctant to give them any attention at all. But let me get this over with so we can move on. So the first accusation that atheists somehow secretly know that God exists, I mean, this is just silly. If I'm unconvinced that a certain something exists, then I don't believe in its existence. Furthermore, the, you secretly believe accusation is no more convincing than saying a person who insists Santa Claus or Superman is fictional is likewise a secret believer of them who is in denial. I mean, the only reason we have an established term for somebody who doesn't believe in the existence of God, that term being atheist, and we don't have a term for somebody who doesn't believe in the existence of Superman, is because, well, we don't see zealots for Superman. We are never approached by people making the accusation that Lex Luthor will torture us if we don't create a life around praise of Superman. So regarding this other argument that nobody can be an atheist because everybody worships something, whether it's money or the government or God or something else, this is an old argument from Christians and confusingly stretches the meaning of worship to include attention to things which many God believers may value as much as the average atheist, government or money or whatever. Some will say, well, you think the government is a higher power, so in that sense you do believe in a higher power, so you're not an atheist. And once again, this is just a weird semantics thing, first with worship and now with higher power. That's not what the word atheism means. We're talking about deities. If you're stretching the meaning of deities to include things like government and money or anything else somebody might pay attention to, well, then you're just playing dumb, really. It's true you can find ideologues who are obsessed with one thing or another or get involved with some kind of ideology and maybe even get into cult-like behavior, but again, let's not go beyond the meaning of atheism here to try to include everything. So finally, we get to the last accusation on the list, the accusation of, the atheism thing is just a front. These Satanists are secretly Illuminati devil worshippers. And, that's revealed when you get into the upper ranks. Clearly, the people who make this accusation have not really thought it through, because it begs so many questions. For example, if the Church of Satan really wants devil worshippers, then how come devil worshippers who approach the organization are always turned away, while so many atheist applicants are let in? Why would the Church of Satan have spent the last 50-plus years reaffirming Satanism's non-theistic worldview in so many books and articles and interviews? And can we sincerely imagine a high-ranking, devout member of an ideological organization, satanic or otherwise, being told to suddenly stop believing in what they deeply believe, what they've been believing all these years, and instead start believing the exact opposite, and that they would just do this without any protest? For that matter, if Satanism is a front to hide devil worshippers from public view, then who would think that names such as Satanism and the Church of Satan, who would think those would be an effective disguise? So just a little bit of thinking reveals that these accusations make no sense. Of course, if conspiracy theorists were capable of critical thought at all, they probably wouldn't be conspiracy theorists in the first place. All right. So with that out of the way, let's get to the meat of the argument here. Let's move on to the less lunatic lines I hear about Satanism versus atheism. Less lunatic, but more popular. So loaded lines, much more often I hear loaded questions and loaded claims. I hear things like, how can you Satanists call yourself atheists if you believe in Satan? Or, well, the Church of Satan doesn't believe in Satan, but, there are other types of Satanists who do. And, they're Satan worshippers, but they're a different type of Satanist. Or we'll hear a line like, if you're atheists, then you should just call yourselves atheists instead of Satanists. Or, how can you have a religion without deities? Or, well, Satanism is a type of atheism, right? Or, Satanism is just atheism with extra steps. Or another one I hear is, how can you be an atheist if you believe in magick? Always spelled M-A-G-I-C-K, of course. So that's a second category. And I'm just going to list the third one before I get into details. So finally, I've seen some Satanists, or at least some people calling themselves such, justifiably or not, saying things which may indicate a misunderstanding of this whole topic. For example, I've heard people say, well, I'm a Satanist, but I'm not an atheist, because you see, to be an atheist, you have to believe with absolute certainty that God doesn't exist. So, I'm really an agnostic. Or I'll hear people who say, well, I'm a Satanist, but you see, that makes me an I-theist, which means I'm not an atheist. So the God I believe in is me, so I believe in a God, therefore I'm not an atheist. Or I'll hear some pseudo-Satanists who say, Anton LaVey really believed in a literal Satan as a deity. I bet you don't know that, but I do, and the Church of Satan changed everything to atheism when Peter Gilmore came aboard. Or finally, I've heard the claim that Anton LaVey was really a deist, D-E-I-S-T, deist, and the Satanic Bible teaches deism, and then after he died, the Church of Satan threw all of that out and started teaching atheism. That no good Peter H. Gilmore telling people that Satanists are atheists, but LaVey didn't believe that. So anyway, a common theme I've seen through all of these categories, all three of them really, is a misunderstanding of not only Satanism, but atheism as well. So before we go any further, let's at least establish a working definition of the word atheism. Many atheists may already be all too familiar with the descriptions that I'm about to give, but for the sake of clarity, here we go. What atheism is? Atheism is most often described as, quote, the absence of a belief in deity. The word means not having a belief in the existence of God nor other gods. That's all it describes. That's it. Stated another way, if you do not believe in the existence of something that you would call a deity, then you are an atheist. So the meaning of the word atheism becomes more obvious when you break down the word into its prefix, its root, and its suffix. The prefix a in atheist, that means without. The the in the middle of the word is derived from the Greek theos, meaning a god or a goddess. And finally, the suffix ism denotes a belief, practice, or essence of something. So atheism is literally without deity belief. Likewise, we have the word theism, which means belief in a deity. Now, other prefixes we could add to theism, we could add mono to the front, monotheism, which means belief in one deity, or polytheism. When you add the prefix poly, that means many, so polytheism means belief in multiple deities. So once again, atheism means without belief in deities. So that's what atheism is. Now, what atheism is not. So first of all, note that the antonym of the word atheism is theism. The antonym of atheism is theism. It is not religion. The words atheism and theism each addressed one and only one issue, belief in the existence of deity. Saying I am an atheist or I am a theist tells you nothing more about that person other than whether or not they believe in any deities. Neither word tells you anything about that person's general view of religion, their view of science, whether or not they have a belief in other supernatural notions, such as an afterlife or auras or ghosts, or how skeptical of a thinker they are. It doesn't tell you what ethics code they may follow. It doesn't tell you their political views, their economic views, nor any other personal convictions. Again, when somebody says, I am an atheist, the only thing you can really conclude is that the person does not believe in any deities. So note that atheism is not a religion. Atheists may be quick to point this out, but many times for the wrong reasons. The reason why atheism is not a religion is the same reason why theism is not a religion either. These two terms, once again, only describe where one stands on the issue of deity existence. You need a lot more than one stance on one issue to define an entire belief system. Now, one particularly annoying phrase I keep hearing is, oh, well, calling atheism a religion is like calling bald a hair color. This is a bad analogy, as it presumes that atheism means the absence of religion. And again, what atheism means is simply not having a belief in the existence of any deities. There are plenty of people who don't happen to subscribe to any particular religion, but would say that they believe in God in some sense or another, and thus they definitely are not atheists. And likewise, there are some atheists who also happen to practice a non-theistic religion, and thus can't be described as having no religion. Now, the topic of non-theistic religions, of which Satanism is just one example, will be discussed in more detail later. But another popular mistake is to think that atheism must strictly mean an assertive disbelief in deity, that is, claiming as a fact that God does not exist. Now, very few people would be atheist by this definition, and as stated earlier, atheism by definition means simply not having a belief in a deity. It doesn't necessarily mean asserting that no deities exist. Now, some people make the mistake of conflating these two concepts because grammatically they sound kind of similar, but there is a difference between rejecting the claim X is true and making the claim X is false. So, for example, if I receive a letter in the mail claiming that I can become a millionaire if I just invest a little money in the sender's special stock system, then being unconvinced that their offer is legitimate is not the same as outright claiming with certainty that I know it's a total hoax. The outright assertion that gods don't exist is often referred to as antitheism, using the prefix anti, A-N-T-I, to mean against. Earlier sources may refer to it as strong atheism or gnostic atheism, Of course, such anti-theists would still be atheists by definition, because after all, they don't believe in any deities, but certainly not all atheists are anti-theists. The myth of the agnosticism escape clause. Likewise, many people who incorrectly believe that atheism can only refer to this anti-theism also incorrectly think that agnosticism represents some sort of halfway point or third alternative to theism and atheism. They may therefore argue that since one cannot be 100% certain of God's existence or non-existence, that rejection of both of these extremes is the only intellectually honest position, and they think that this means that they are agnostic. Well, the reality is that the belief in a deity is a binary position. Either you believe in the existence of something that you would consider to be a deity, or you do not hold such a belief. So even if a person claims, well, I don't know whether or not God exists, or claims, well, I can't tell you whether or not God exists because I haven't gotten a good definition of God yet. Well, in either case, that still implies that the existence of deity is not something that they believe. This still makes them atheists, not theists. Agnosticism cannot therefore be some sort of third option. Now, as for what agnosticism really means, well, the term agnosticism was first coined by T.H. Huxley in the 19th century. And in short, it means that the existence and nature of deity is unknown and unknowable. So we can break that down, that word again, into the prefix, the core. Agnostic is actually a, which means without, and then gnosis, which means knowledge. So literally without knowledge, in this case, without knowledge of deity. So remember that theism and atheism address belief, not knowledge. As agnosticism addresses knowledge, not belief, agnosticism is not mutually exclusive with atheism. A person who does not believe in a deity, that is an atheist, but additionally does not claim to know for certain that deities don't exist, which is agnosticism, would be appropriately described as an agnostic-atheist. This is why one of the aforementioned synonyms of antitheist, an atheist who additionally makes the assertive claim, again, that gods do not exist, that sometimes an antitheist is called a gnostic atheist. Likewise, a person who believes in a deity but asserts that he or she can't know for sure that the deity exists is an agnostic theist. And finally, somebody who claims to know that God exists would be a gnostic theist. So when you hear somebody say simply, well, I'm an agnostic, what that typically means is I'm an agnostic atheist. Or I think what it really means is I'm an agnostic atheist with a vocabulary problem. And one final note about agnosticism and Gnosticism. The Gnosticism I'm talking about in this context is lowercase g, Gnosticism. And that's not to be confused with Gnosticism with a capital G. Because the Gnosticism with a capital G refers to a very particular set of religious beliefs from the 1st century, rooted largely in a number of Judeo-Christian beliefs, details of which are well beyond the scope of this episode. But you can look up on Wikipedia or whatever. And again, this other use of the word Gnostic is obviously not what I mean when I'm talking about terms like Gnostic theist and Gnostic atheist. So besides agnosticism, there are other isms which sometimes get misused, I would say, as an attempt to avoid the labels of atheist or theist. For example, I have seen some people claim to be neither theist or atheist, and they say that they are an apatheist. So it's like a combination of the words apathy and theist, which means they either don't care one way or another about the God question, or they believe that nobody can come up with a good enough definition to let them know whether they believe that idea or reject that idea. But once again, this means that they currently do not hold a belief in anything that they would consider to be a deity. Thus, they are still atheists by definition. And that's still true, even if they don't like the word atheism, or they don't like most of the people they meet who call themselves atheists. you don't believe in a deity, you're still an atheist. There are also other isms for beliefs about God that do not match the traditional Western view of God as a personal God, such as, there's pantheism, for example. There is deism, D-E-I-S-M, but these are still ways to believe in the existence of a deity, so therefore I would argue they still fall into that category of theism. Again, either you believe in a deity or you don't. There's no in-between about it. Next section, Satanism's answer to the God question. Now, the concept of deity is obviously a central topic to most religions, so when learning about any particular religion, it is common to first ask how that religion views God, for lack of a better term. Does this religion believe only one God to exist, or many gods? Does this religion simply not address the issue of gods at all? Does it consider it not important? If this religion says that a god or gods exist, in what sense does he exist, or she exist, or it, or they? Does the religion have sacred writings describing what this god allegedly did, what he's like, what he wants? Is this god described as having a sort of reasoned way of thinking, not unlike humans? What sort of role does he play in human affairs? Or did he just create the universe and then leave us to our own devices? Are there rewards for obeying this deity? Are there consequences for not obeying? So these are all questions that come up when people ask about a religion. And getting to Satanism, well, the Satanic Bible is a book that we have, and it wastes little time addressing the whole God topic. So it addresses it head on in the first 2 chapters of the book's philosophical portion, the Book of Lucifer. The first 2 chapters of this section are respectively titled Wanted, God, Dead or Alive, and The God You Save May Be Yourself. Now, the first of these chapters points out how the interpretations and claims about God have been ridiculously varied throughout the different times and different cultures, with some descriptions even being self-contradictory. On the more abstract side, God is just a personification some humans slap on notions such as fate, existence, love. You hear that one a lot. God is love, or consciousness, or God is the perceived forces of nature. But whether people choose to call selected life events acts of God, or the hand of fate, or by no name at all, and in this last case that would be atheism, the question is wholly irrelevant to Satanism. That's what's explained in the book. As the book explicitly states, quote, man has always created his gods rather than his gods creating him. Furthermore, it also says, quote, the Satanist realizes that man and the action and reaction of the universe are responsible for everything and doesn't mislead himself into thinking that someone cares. Satanists, however, cast a skeptical view, I would say, on people who, despite understandably rejecting the supernatural claims of Christianity and other spiritual religions, still try to retain that religion's other dogma. So the example given in the book is the notion of Christian atheists, which are atheists who pride themselves on practicing Christ-like behavior, if you will. And yeah, Christian atheists is an oxymoron, but it was the name of an actual movement at the time. And as for what Satanists do in fact believe and practice when it comes to ethics, that topic is addressed in later chapters. But the second chapter then takes all of this to the philosophically satanic conclusion of realizing that there is no carnal versus spiritual world, but rather there is only the carnal, and it is our own biological animal brains which have allowed us to create concepts such as gods or spirituality, to create those things in the first place. Now, the Satanist views oneself as the one who matters the most at the end of the day, and the one most responsible for how his or her life turns out. In this sense, the true God of the Satanist is the self, the one whom the Satanist serves, the one who created this idea of the spirituality in the first place. That's the self. And again, it is understood this is not belief in an actual supernatural God. I don't think I'm actually supernatural when I say I am my own God, but rather it's calling ourselves our own gods in that aforementioned metaphorical sense. That was Satanism's answer to the God question. How about Satanism's answer to the Satan question? So if the first 2 chapters of the Satanic Bible's Book of Lucifer can be thought of as addressing the God question, I would say the 3rd and 4th chapters may be thought of as addressing the Satan question. Namely, a look at the various depictions of Satan, hell, and assorted evil entities from mythology, and how we Satanists repurpose them, and most importantly, why. Now, the 3rd chapter in the Book of Lucifer, Some Evidence of a New Satanic Age. Well, this chapter explores the history of how religions have traditionally used the concept of sin to shame and control people, particularly in branding certain behaviors which extend from natural animal instincts and branding them as sins. The chapter goes on to point out the hypocrisy in those religions having to now go back on their own dogma under the rationalization that, we have to keep up with the times, and that they are forced to do that if they want to keep congregants, as well as the person who identifies with some particular religion without really believing much of what it teaches. That sort of person is criticized as well. If Satan is humanity's established personification of concepts like indulgence, rational self-interest, skepticism, and the so-called 7 deadly sins, then we can just adopt the most brutally honest and apt name for such a philosophy, Satanism. You've kind of heard this in the introduction that I give in every episode of Satansplain. Now, occasionally I will see somebody who stumbles into a conversation about Satanism, doesn't bother to research anything about the topic, but still asks for the reasons for the name. Or upon finding out that Satanism doesn't match their own misconceptions of what they thought it was, they tell us that we should simply change the name of our religion, to something else. Well, to quote a meme I created for such occasions, I say, sure thing, random internet person. Change our name. Yeah, we'll get right on that. So these sorts of questions are answered in this very same chapter of the book. LaVey points out that the name suggestion of humanism, for example, wouldn't work for us, as humanism is not a religion. He says it is simply a way of life with no ceremony or dogma. Satanism has both ceremony and dogma. And those 2 components, ceremony and dogma, I would say define and distinguish a religion from just a philosophy. Another alternative suggestion is to use some sort of, quote, name that would have the connotation of witchcraft group, something a little more esoteric, something less blatant. Now, LaVey then addresses such ritual practicing occult groups, which Satanism often gets lumped in with and compared to, and especially was being lumped in and compared to back in the day. And this also includes white witchcraft groups who want to indulge in the esoteric and macabre nature of occultism while simultaneously wanting to come off as righteous do-gooders. But occultism or no occultism, as explained in the book, you cannot be a Satanist if you, quote, cannot divorce yourself from hypocritical self-deceit. So I would say, in short, if you say you agree with the philosophy, but you still have a hang-up on the name, either from perhaps a feeling of self-righteousness or the need for wide social approval, well, then you may not be really in tune with this satanic philosophy after all. Now, the next questions answered in the chapter are, quote, but why even have a religion in the first place if all you do is what comes naturally anyway? Why not just do it? Well, to paraphrase what the book says, thanks to scientific discovery, we no longer have to rely on supernatural religious answers to explain things like the weather or illnesses. And this extends to psychiatry, which has given us a great insight into why we humans act and think the way we do in all sorts of different situations. But as the book points out, there is a catch to all of this. And as explained, quote, it is one thing to accept something intellectually, but to accept the same thing emotionally is an entirely different matter, unquote. Now, an example of this concept I've seen is the occasional Christian-turned atheist who, despite intellectually understanding why the Holy Bible makes no logical sense, still may sometimes fear going to hell, and that's due to years of religious indoctrination. Now, such ideological programming from Christianity and other religions, other ideologies, unfortunately rarely ever gets rationalized away overnight. So conversely, a solid intellectual argument against a religious zealot or conspiracy theorist rarely changes their minds, And the reason for that is because people usually have a very heavy emotional investment in an idea. So once again, it is one thing to accept something intellectually, but to accept it emotionally is different. So as the book continues, quote, "The one need that psychiatry cannot fill is man's inherent need for emotionalizing through dogma. Man needs ceremony and ritual, fantasy and enchantment. Psychiatry, despite all the good it has done, has robbed man of wonder and fantasy, which religion in the past has provided. Satanism, realizing the current needs of man, fills a large gray void between religion and psychiatry. The Satanic philosophy combines the fundamentals of psychology and good, honest emotionalizing or dogma. It provides man with his much-needed fantasy. There is nothing wrong with dogma, providing it is not based on ideas and actions which go completely against human nature." End quote. Also, as mentioned in the chapter prior to this one, if spiritual religions can use ritual and ceremony as devices to sustain that person's faith in superstitious lies, well, then these rituals and ceremonies, the essence of them, can also be used to sustain an emotional grounding in the truth. And the fourth chapter, Hell, the Devil, and How to Sell Your Soul, takes this a step further by having a look first at various past depictions of Satan and hell and how they've changed over the centuries, and how religion has used these concepts and other scapegoats as a means of manipulation and control of people. And there's also an extensive list of similarly quote-unquote evil entities from various world mythologies, and again, all creations of the human imagination, but showing that the underlying concepts embraced in Satanism are hardly limited to what Christianity condemned. Old tales such as the idea that a Satanist must sell his soul or sign a pact, well, those are brought up in the chapter and easily dismissed. And the chapter ends on the amusingly poetic note that when we take the unfounded accusations of evil against us and turn them around, we live. We're going to take a short break right now, and when we get back, we're going to look at each and every one of those example questions I gave at the beginning of the show. You are listening to Satansplain.
You are listening to Satansplain, real satanic talk with Church of Satan Magister Bill M. For questions, comments, and correspondence, send an email to bill@satansplain.com.
AA makes Scientology look credible. At least the major cult religions have a consistent dogma. AA tells you to make up your own God if you don't already have a God. First step of AA, you have to admit that you're powerless over alcohol, and then they go on to the next step, which you have to turn your life and your will to a power higher than yourself. And you go, I was a free-thinking atheist coming into this bullshit. But since I went along with you on that first step on a goof, where I'm powerless over alcohol, I guess then by default, alcohol would have to be my only higher power. So I'll go with vodka, I guess. If I am to be a monotheist and pick just one, I will go with vodka.
That little bit of comedic blasphemy was brought to you by The Devil's Mischief, comedy that's not made for the masses. Listen to the show The Devil's Mischief on RadioFreeSatan.com.
Magister Bill M. here. You are listening to Satansplain. Visit the official website for the show, Satansplain.com. You can go there to listen to all of the past episodes of Satansplain and read more about the show. Though you can also listen to Satansplain on YouTube, Audible, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and other places as well. You can also email me with your questions and comments. That email address is bill@satansplain.com. I gotta say that normally when I take a break, I play an ad for The Devil's Mischief, but lately YouTube has been flagging the episodes for copyright infringement because I play like a 30-second sample of some comedy, even though I have it pitch shifted and whatnot. So if you're used to listening to Satansplain on YouTube and the commercial break seems abrupt, well, that's the reason why. I cut it out when YouTube flags it. So let us continue now with the essay on the complication of atheism. Now, this final part of the show is admittedly going to sound repetitious at times with points I made before the break, but remember, I'm also working on a separate FAQ format of sorts, so sometimes I'm trying to make some of these answers self-contained, if you will. As always, the YouTube version of this show should have some chapter breaks in the description for people who want to jump to a particular section. The answers. So with the meaning of atheism now thoroughly explained, along with an overview of how Satanism addresses the concept of deity, let's get back to the rest of those questions and statements listed earlier. So the first of those questions in the second set was, how can you Satanists call yourself atheists if you believe in Satan? Well, the answer, of course, is that Satanists do not believe in Satan as a deity. We use Satan strictly as a metaphor. This is true even when using Satan in a ceremonial context or saying, "Hail Satan." As the Satanic Bible states, humans invented gods rather than the other way around, and even when a Satanist says, "I am my own god," this is just symbolic language to mean, I am the one whom I serve, I am the one ultimately responsible for what happens in my life, and it obviously does not mean I am a supernatural deity. So as we do not believe in any actual deities, we are atheists by definition. Though I'm sure there will be idiots out there who see the title of this Satansplain episode and don't bother to listen to it, and they reply in the comments with, "Oh, I can explain this. We're atheists. We don't believe in God or Satan or any other gods, but Satanists do because they worship Satan." In which case I will say, wrong. Listen to the episode, you moron. So the next statement was, well, the Church of Satan doesn't believe in Satan, but there are other types of Satanists who do, and, they're devil worshippers, but they're a type of Satanist. Now, this is something that's going to probably warrant its own Satansplain episode talking about this, but I'm going to try to sum this up quickly. Devil worshippers are devil worshippers, not Satanists. Non-Satanists may see these various groups of people labeling themselves as Satanists, or in some cases being labeled by Christians or by the media as Satanists. And they think, oh, well, these are all different denominations of the same religion. This, however, is incorrect. So no, it's not like Protestants versus Catholics, because you see, the reason why Protestants and Catholics are considered two different denominations of the same religion, that religion being Christianity, and why they're not considered two different religions is because they still ultimately share the same theological origins. They share the same main scriptures. They share the same core beliefs, which distinguish Christianity from the other religions of the world. The same simply can't be said about the dozens of largely unrelated groups mislabeled as Satanists. So, as closer examination shows, these groups, such as Satanists like us and devil worshippers and whoever else, well, these groups are too theologically dissimilar, and they conflict on fundamental beliefs to be considered sects of the same religion. So it's not like we're talking about people who have a different interpretation of the Satanic Bible. No, we're talking about people who are practicing fundamentally different belief systems. That's what devil worshippers are. And as there is no evidence of an actual codified religion calling itself Satanism until the establishment of the Church of Satan in 1966, we see no justifiable reason to misuse the same label of Satanism to describe some unrelated and, again, fundamentally different belief system. And as Satanism, as established by the Church of Satan, is a non-theistic religion, we got dibs on the name, and it stands that Satanists are atheists. Next, a line I hear is, if you're atheists, then shouldn't you just call yourself atheists, not Satanists? And my response to this is rather like telling Christians, Muslims, or Jews that they should just drop their respective labels and just call themselves monotheists. Again, the terms atheism, monotheism, and polytheism only tell you if a person believes in 0, 1, or more than one deity. That's all the words mean. There is much more to religion than how many deities it purports to include. Additional components of a religion typically include a set of particular philosophical convictions, a code of ethics, grand worldviews such as, what is humanity's supposed role in the universe. Religions also have symbolism. Religions have ceremony. And as atheism merely describes one aspect of Satanism, that is the fact that we don't believe in deities, and a person can most certainly be an atheist without being a Satanist, then the word atheism is not really a sufficiently descriptive label to distinguish us from the rest of the world. So another question that comes up, how can you have a religion without deities? Well, many people, especially those who were raised only knowing Christianity, sometimes erroneously think that theism is a necessary requirement for religion, sometimes necessary and sufficient. But non-theistic religions do exist. Satanism is a non-theistic religion, but Satanism is not even the only non-theistic religion in the world. You can find atheists who may be practitioners of Theravada Buddhism, for example, or Jainism, Taoism, Scientology. There's atheists in Scientology. The Raelian movement. There's even an atheistic approach to Judaism called humanistic Judaism, believe it or not. Samkhya Hinduism is another one, or some other non-theistic religion. Other atheists may be part of a religious group that accepts both theists and atheists, such as the Unitarian Universalist Church. Now, some people may try to rationalize these examples away by claiming, oh, well, those are philosophies, not religions. And again, no, they're religions. While all religions include some form of philosophy, philosophies themselves do not have all the additional components of religion, like the ones I listed, like ceremony, symbolism, dogma. So, once again, theism isn't an absolute requirement for religion, and even theistic religions have more components than just their theism and their philosophy. Now, quite often this bogus claim of, oh, those are philosophies, not religions, that argument is used by people who feel an emotional need, I've noticed, to believe religion and theism are inseparable. The people who believe this, well, that includes not only devout theistic religionists, but I've noticed many atheists as well. And it seems to me that many atheists, in their effort to distance themselves from religion, end up erroneously equating the term religion with theism. Now, granted, the word religion often gets carelessly used as a synonym for theism or for Christianity. Sometimes a person raised under Christianity or otherwise appalled by it finds a comforting home in the atheist collective, in which case the person may very well come to mistakenly think of atheism as an entity that's a rival to Christianity, perhaps complete with its own denominations, which brings us to the next misconception. Satanism is a type of atheism, right? No. Again, atheism is itself just a response to one claim, the claim of deities existing. Atheism is not a religion for the same reason theism is not a religion. These just describe how many gods you believe in. So atheism is not a religion, let alone one with denominations. So no, I wouldn't say Satanism is a type of atheism. It would be much more accurate to say that atheism is just one of many isms that make up Satanism, one of many isms that Satanism happens to contain. So Satanism is therefore no more of a type of atheism than it is a type of Epicureanism or a type of individualism or a type of meritocracy or type of any other aspect of Satanism. And the next question I'm often hearing is, how can you be an atheist if you believe in magic? So this question is loaded in several ways. One easy answer to this, though, is that the supernatural, occult notion of magic, magick, which is not what Satanists believe, and I will explain more on that in a moment. Magic is not itself a deity, and again, since the one and only requirement for being an atheist is not believing in a deity, it is entirely possible for an atheist to believe in some sort of supernatural idea, provided that that supernatural idea is not a deity. So there are, for example, atheists who, despite not believing in the existence of deities by definition, do in fact believe in things like ghosts or water dowsing or clairvoyance. And yeah, such atheists may be rare, but they do exist. Now that's the easy answer. Now the real problem with this question, how can you be an atheist if you believe in magic, is that it presumes we believe in the sort of wieldable supernatural power seen in occult lore. And in short, we don't. Just as Satanists use Satan as a constructive, emotional driving metaphor, Satanists do the same with magic. Satanists incorporate ritual knowingly as a psychological and theatrical psychodramatic tool, which still fits in with Satanism's materialistic worldview. And as a suggestion, this is what I was going to list in the article. While a full explanation of the practice is well beyond the scope of this essay, a detailed discussion on the topic can be heard on Demented One's Greater Magic special with guest Magister Bill M. discussion and its follow-up part 2, both on YouTube, and I can give a link with that. But, eventually I'm probably going to be covering those topics on my own on Satansplain, so I'm sure I'll have relevant episode for that. Finally, we get to the last set of ideas based on misconceptions, the third set of questions/claims, starting with this line. I will hear some Satanists who say, well, I'm a Satanist, but I can't be an atheist because to be an atheist, you have to believe with absolute certainty that God doesn't exist, so therefore I'm an agnostic. So as already explained, this is not what atheism nor agnosticism mean. The only requirement for being an atheist is simply not having a belief in the existence of deities. Even if you don't like the term atheist or feel that you have little in common with the atheist community at large, I certainly do not have much in common with them, it feels. Anyway, if you fit the definition of atheist, then you're still an atheist, like it or not. You may additionally happen to assert that the existence of deities is ultimately unknown and unknowable, in which case that you would be an agnostic-atheist. Again, agnosticism and atheism are not mutually exclusive. That's because atheism is not the same exact thing as antitheism. And another one of those lines I hear is, well, I'm a Satanist, but that makes me an I-theist, which means I believe in the existence of a deity, which would be me, and thus I can't be an atheist. Okay. Since the Satanist views oneself as one's own god, the term I-theist is certainly a valid one for Satanists. We sometimes use that. Most atheists, however, do not take this philosophical position. Regardless, when a Satanist says, I am my own God, again, it's just a symbolic way of saying I am the one who ultimately matters the most in my life. I am the one who's ultimately responsible for my own fate. I am the one I am to revere and respect, and other such roles which humans have traditionally invented deities to play to. So saying I am my own God in this context is obviously not a declaration of yourself having supernatural powers, immortality, or invincibility. I would argue that it follows I-theists still don't believe in an actual deity in the understood sense. Thus, for all practical purposes of conversation, Satanists are still atheists. On a side note, the notion that omnipotence is a requirement for being a deity is easily disproved when you look at mythology. Almost all stories from mythology are precisely about gods running into problems and limitations and even suffering through them. Okay, and now we get to this next claim that I have been reading. People who say, well, Anton LaVey was a deist and the Satanic Bible teaches deism, or some people claim even theism. And then after he died, the Church of Satan threw that out and started teaching atheism. I've heard people who claim, Anton LaVey really did believe in a literal Satan, and you guys changed that. So both of these are just ridiculous claims that I've heard on more than one occasion. In fact, I only ever seem to hear these from people desperately trying to push the tiresome narrative that the Church of Satan used to embrace belief X, but now it believes in this opposing belief Y, and therefore you should join my rival satanic organization because we believe in X instead of Y. And typically the proposed organization is nothing more than, a website or a social media page. So, for starters, there are numerous well-documented examples of Anton LaVey stating his own non-theistic worldview, which is also consistent with the Satanic Bible. There is an article you can read on churchofsatan.com called What the Devil that samples a lot of these things. And LaVey also did not even eschew the term atheist itself. He didn't avoid it, as he noticed, as noted in an interview by Eugene S. Robinson, an interview with Anton LaVey where Anton LaVey says, quote, "Look, I'm an atheist." And he adds, "Satan is symbolically representative for us." I suppose the current high priest, Peter H. Gilmore, uses the word atheism more often in interviews, uses the word more freely than Anton LaVey ever did. But that's true of people today in general compared to earlier generations. People are much more comfortable with the term atheist as more people now know what it means. Now, as for this claim about deism, first of all, to be clear, deism, D-E-I-S-M, which is essentially the belief that there's a God who created the universe but plays no role in human affairs, that, I will admit, may seem compatible with Satanism. And this is because the entire notion of cosmic origins, deity or no deity, is ultimately irrelevant to the principles of Satanism. The same with other non-theistic religions in general. But as the Satanic Bible points out early on, again, quote, man has always created his gods rather than his gods creating him. And it further explains that whether one chooses to call the perceived balancing force of nature God, which would be deism, or by no name at all, and when you don't name those things, that's atheism. In either case, it, quote, is far too impersonal to care about the happiness or misery of flesh and blood creatures upon this ball of dirt which we live. The Satanist realizes that man and the action and reaction of the universe is responsible for everything and doesn't mislead himself into thinking that someone cares. So, in practice, both the deist and the atheist, I would say, live their respective lives the same. They live their lives without a belief in a deity who actually cares and affects them. So whatever disagreements a deist and an atheist may have about the origins of the universe are thus simply irrelevant to the practice of Satanism. I mean, let's say you come to the Church of Satan and you say you're a deist. You believe, for some reason or another, that the universe was created by some intelligent designer, but that this creator doesn't really do much of anything else. Doesn't answer prayers, doesn't care what you do with your life, doesn't care if you don't pray to him. Fine. I'm an atheist. I don't believe such a creator exists in the first place. So you and I have a different view on the topic of cosmology, like where matter and energy come from. Does this change any of the 9 satanic statements for you and I? No. Does this change any of the 11 satanic rules of the earth? No. The 9 satanic sins? No. Does this really make the role and practice of satanic ritual any different? No. Does it change anything else in Satanism? No. Do we have to make a new satanic organization based on this difference of opinion on the origins of the laws of physics? No. Now, rather than trying to explain all of the above philosophical intricacies of deism versus theism and agnostic-atheism, trying to explain all that to today's journalists, who are often willfully clueless, deal mostly in just sound bites, and falsely presume Satanists are devil worshippers. Yeah, rather than trying to explain all of the above to journalists, we find it much more effective to use the simplified 2-word response of, we're atheists. See how much simpler that is? And finally, wrapping this episode up, in summary, summarize everything I talked about. The term atheism describes nothing more than not having a belief in the existence of deity. As Satanists do not believe in deities, this means Satanists are atheists. Satanism does use Satan as a symbol for concepts like carnal nature and views the self symbolically as one's own god, but both of those notions are still understood and used as metaphors, not a belief in any deities in the actual supernatural sense. In addition to being atheists, however, Satanists are adherents of Satanism, an example of one of the world's several non-theistic religions. Also, we Satanists do not secretly believe in a literal Satan, nor see any reason to. And the arguments claiming we do really don't make any sense when you examine them a bit. Many non-theistic religions, including Satanism, see the notion of cosmic origins to be ultimately irrelevant to the practice of that non-theistic religion. While the doctrines of Satanism would be in conflict with belief in a personal deity, and by personal deity I mean a god who answers prayers, has special demands on humans, is revered, and so on, it is technically possible for Satanists to hold a belief in a non-interactive, uncaring deity who plays no role in human affairs, that is deism, but finding a Satanist who is a deist is kind of rare and, more importantly, indistinguishable from the general atheist view of, I don't believe in a God who affects my life. Thus, it is simple and accurate enough to say Satanists are atheists. And that is going to do it for this episode of Satansplain. Satanism and atheism, a topic that should be simple enough to understand and yet seems to warrant a little splaining from Satansplain. Thank you for listening. Hail Satan. You have been listening to Satansplain. If you have enjoyed this episode, please give it a like and subscribe where available. For more information on the show, visit Satansplain.com. And to learn more about Satanism itself, visit churchofsatan.com. This episode, copyright 2022, Magister Bill M.